In certain corners of the world, power does not gather in public. It moves quietly beneath the surface of society, far from cameras and headlines. In these hidden places, the rules that protect ordinary people disappear, replaced by something far more dangerous. On this night, deep beneath the streets of Manhattan, one such place was alive with activity. The underground hall looked nothing like the dark warehouses most people would imagine for illegal dealings. Instead, it resembled a private luxury club built for the richest members of society. Soft golden lights illuminated polished marble floors, while elegant chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting off expensive glass tables and velvet seating. From the outside, the building above appeared to be an exclusive members-only establishment. But several floors below ground, something far darker was taking place. Men wearing tailored suits slowly filled the private hall, their voices low and controlled as they spoke with one another. Most of them had the kind of wealth that placed them among the most powerful individuals in America: corporate executives, real estate billionaires, investment fund managers, even a few politicians whose faces appeared frequently on national news broadcasts. Yet none of them had gathered for business meetings or social entertainment. Tonight, they had come to buy something far more disturbing, because the auction scheduled to begin in less than 20 minutes was not selling art, jewelry, or rare antiques. Tonight, they were bidding on human lives. At the far end of the underground hall stood a raised platform surrounded by thick velvet ropes. Several chairs faced the stage, arranged like seats in a private theater. Behind the platform, a guarded hallway led deeper into the facility where the merchandise was being held. Inside one of those locked rooms, Aria Bennett slowly regained consciousness. The room was small and windowless, illuminated only by a faint overhead light that flickered slightly as she opened her eyes. For a moment, her thoughts felt scattered, as if her mind was struggling to reconnect with reality. Her head throbbed painfully, her throat felt dry, and a dull sense of fear crept slowly into her chest. Aria sat up slowly, pressing a hand against the cold metal surface of the chair she had been placed on. Her wrists were tied loosely with restraints that allowed only minimal movement. She tried to remember what had happened. Fragments of memory surfaced through the haze. A late evening walk, a car stopping beside the sidewalk, a man asking for directions. Then darkness. Now she was here. The realization settled into her thoughts with terrifying clarity. She had been taken. Aria Bennett was 25 years old, and until this moment her life had been defined by a constant struggle to survive. She had grown up inside the American foster care system after losing her parents in a car accident when she was only 6 years old. Childhood had never felt stable. Homes changed frequently. Caregivers came and went, and every new environment carried the quiet reminder that she belonged nowhere permanently. Yet despite the instability, Aria had always believed she could eventually build a normal life. She worked hard, finished high school, took small jobs wherever she could find them: waitressing, retail, administrative work. Nothing glamorous, but enough to keep her independent. For years she had carefully constructed a fragile sense of stability. Until tonight. Aria forced herself to remain calm as she examined the room around her. A heavy steel door stood across from her chair. Small ventilation ducts lined the ceiling. The room had no windows, no decorations, and no visible exit besides a locked door. This place was not meant for comfort. It was meant for containment. Footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the walls, followed by muffled voices speaking in low tones. Aria felt a chill run through her body. Wherever she was not alone. Minutes passed slowly as her thoughts raced through every possibility. Kidnapping for ransom seemed unlikely. No one in her life had the kind of money criminals would demand. Human trafficking? The idea made her stomach tighten. But the deeper she listened to the sounds outside the room, the more the situation began to reveal itself. Doors opening and closing, metal locks sliding into place, voices discussing schedules and preparations. This operation felt organized, professional, which meant the people responsible had done this before. Eventually, the steel door opened. 2 men entered the room. Both wore black suits and carried themselves with the calm efficiency of individuals who were simply completing a routine task. One of them glanced at Aria briefly. "She's awake." The other nodded. That's fine. The auction starts soon. The word struck Arya like a sudden shock. Auction. Her mind struggled to understand what that could possibly mean. Before she could ask questions, the men untied her restraints and pulled her to her feet. Move. Arya stumbled slightly as they guided her into the hallway beyond the room. The corridor was lined with several identical doors, each guarded by security personnel, standing silently along the walls. Some of the doors were partially open, and through those openings, Arya caught brief glimpses of other people, men, women, all looking just as confused and terrified as she felt. The reality became impossible to ignore. Everyone here had been taken. Everyone here was waiting for something. The men escorting Arya led her toward a staircase that descended even deeper beneath the building. As they reached the bottom, the hallway opened into the main hall of the underground club. The room was already filling with wealthy bidders. Their voices blended together in calm conversation as waiters served drinks and small plates of food. The environment looked almost elegant enough to be mistaken for a luxury social event, except for one detail. Near the stage, a large digital screen displayed a list of numbers and photographs. Arya's heart began to pound faster as she realized what those images represented. They were profiles, the people waiting in the holding rooms, the people about to be sold. The truth hit her with devastating force. She was not here by accident. She was one of the items scheduled for sale. Arya's escorts positioned her behind a curtain beside the stage where several other captives were already standing. Some stared at the floor in silent shock. Others whispered desperate prayers under their breath. The sound of a gavel striking would echo through the hall. The auction was beginning. A man in a gray suit stepped onto stage and greeted the crowd with the polished voice of someone accustomed to handling expensive transactions. The bidding for the first individual started immediately. Numbers rose quickly as wealthy bidders casually raised their paddles, competing with one another as if they were purchasing rare collectibles rather than human beings. Arya felt her body grow colder with each passing moment. This was real, and there was no one here who intended to stop it. Her turn approached. The man beside her glanced at the list on his tablet. Next, Arya was guided onto the stage. The bright lights made it difficult to see the faces in the crowd clearly, but she could still feel the weight of dozens of eyes examining her like merchandise. The auctioneer began describing her details to the room. Age, health, background. Every word stripped away another piece of her humanity. The first bid appeared instantly. Then another, and another. The numbers climbed higher as men across the room competed for ownership. Arya felt her chest tighten as fear overwhelmed her thoughts. She believed this was the end of her life, the moment where everything she had fought to build would vanish forever. But suddenly something changed. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. The room fell silent. A man entered slowly, surrounded by several security guards. His presence carried a quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. Even the wealthiest bidders lowered their paddles slightly as they recognized him, because in a room full of powerful men, one name still carried more influence than all the others combined. And as a newcomer stepped forward into the light, the auctioneer's voice faltered slightly. Dominic Varela had just entered the room. Power does not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it enters quietly, and an entire room still feels it. That was exactly what happened the moment Dominic Varela stepped into the underground hall. The doors closed behind him with a muted thud, and a subtle but immediate shift spread to the crowd of wealthy bidders. Conversations that had filled the room seconds earlier faded into cautious whispers. Men who controlled billion-dollar corporations suddenly lowered their voices, because everyone present recognized the same truth. Dominic Varela was not just another wealthy man attending the auction. He was a man who owned the room the moment he walked into it. Arya Bennett noticed the change immediately. Standing under the harsh lights of the stage, she could feel the tension ripple across the audience like a silent wave. The men who had been casually raising their bidding paddles moments ago now looked toward the entrance with careful expressions. Some of them leaned back in their chairs. Others quietly placed their paddles down on the tables beside them. It was not fear exactly, but it was something close. Respect mixed with caution. Dominic Varela moved forward slowly, surrounded by two security men who walked several steps behind him. Unlike most of the people in the room, He did not look impressed by the luxury of the underground club. His posture was relaxed, his pace unhurried, yet the calm confidence in his movements carried the kind of authority that did not require explanation. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that fit his tall frame with effortless precision. Dark hair was combed neatly back from his face, and his sharp features gave him the appearance of a man who rarely tolerated mistakes. At first glance, someone unfamiliar with his reputation might have mistaken him for a powerful corporate executive, but the people inside this room knew better. Dominic Varela was far more dangerous than that. For years his name had circulated through both legal and criminal networks across the country. Officially, he controlled a collection of international investment firms, shipping companies, and private security contracts. Unofficially, those businesses were widely believed to be only the visible edge of a much larger empire, an empire that stretched across multiple continents. Money laundering operations, black market trading networks, private intelligence channels, and alliances with individuals whose influence extended deep into political and financial institutions. Law enforcement agencies had attempted to investigate Dominic Varela many times, but none of those investigations had ever produced enough evidence to challenge him directly, because Dominic understood something most criminals never learned. Power was not about violence. Power was about control, and Dominic Varela controlled everything around him. As he walked toward the center of the hall, the auctioneer cleared his throat nervously and adjusted the microphone. "Mr. Varela," he said carefully, "we were not expecting you tonight." Dominic stopped a few steps from the front row of seats. His eyes scanned the room slowly, acknowledging several familiar faces among the bidders. Some of them offered polite nods. Others avoided his gaze entirely. Dominic responded to none of them. Instead, he took a seat at an empty table near the center of the hall. Only then did the auctioneer resume speaking. "We were just beginning the next item," the man said, try to recover his professional composure. Dominic's expression remained neutral. "Continue." The single word was calm, yet it carried enough authority that the auctioneer immediately obeyed. Arya still stood on the stage. Her heart continued pounding as she tried to understand why the entire atmosphere had shifted so dramatically. She had never heard the name Dominic Varela before tonight, but judging from the reactions around the room, his presence alone was enough to change the rules of whatever game these men were playing. The auctioneer glanced at the tablet in his hand before addressing the audience again. "Our next lot is Arya Bennett, 25 years old, excellent health condition, and..." His voice continued describing her like a product, but Arya barely heard the rest of the words, because Dominic Varela had finally looked up, and his eyes were now fixed on her. It was not the kind of gaze she had experienced from the other bidders earlier. Those men had looked at her with greedy curiosity. Dominic's expression held something different: observation, calculation. He studied her face carefully, as if examining details that mattered for reasons she could not understand. The auctioneer raised his hand. "Opening bid, $200,000. Several paddles rose immediately. The bidding began climbing again. 300,000, 400,000, 500,000. But something unusual was happening among the bidders. Each time the numbers increased, several of the wealthiest men in the room glanced toward Dominic Varela, waiting, watching, because they understood the same silent rule. If Dominic decided to participate in the auction, continuing to compete against him could become very expensive. The numbers reached $700,000. Then Dominic finally lifted one finger slightly. One of his security men raised a paddle. 1 million. The words echoed through the hall. The reaction was immediate. Several bidders lowered their paddles at once. Others leaned back in their chairs, quietly removing themselves from the competition. Dominic had made his move, and everyone in the room understood that continuing to bid against him would not only drive the price higher, it might also attract the kind of attention they preferred to avoid. Still, one man seated near the back hesitated, a wealthy real estate investor known for his aggressive deals. He raised his paddle cautiously. 1.2 million. The room grew tense. All eyes shifted back to Dominic. He did not appear offended. In fact, he did not react at all. Instead, He continued studying Arya with the same calm focus he had maintained since entering the hall. Then he nodded once. His security man raised the paddle again. 2 million. The number ended the competition immediately. The real estate investor lowered his paddle. Without argument, the other bidders remained silent, because everyone present knew when a contest was over. The auctioneer hesitated for only a moment before striking the wooden gavel. Sold. The sound echoed sharply through the hall. Arya felt her stomach twist as the finality of the words settled into her thoughts. She had just been purchased, and the man who now owned her future was the most powerful person in the room. 2 security guards approached the stage and guided her down the steps. The crowd slowly returned to quiet conversation as the auction moved on to the next item. But Dominic Varela remained seated, watching her. Arya felt his gaze follow her as the guards led her across the hall. Fear tightened in her chest. She could not understand why a man with that level of power and wealth would spend millions of dollars to buy someone like her. What possible reason could he have? As she was brought closer to his table, Dominic finally stood. The guard stopped a few steps away, waiting for instructions. For several seconds, Dominic said nothing. He simply looked at Arya Bennett, and instead of appearing satisfied with his purchase, Dominic Varela studied her face with strange, unsettling curiosity. Powerful men rarely make decisions without a reason, especially men like Dominic Varela. Every deal he made, every investment he approved, and every move inside his empire was calculated carefully. Those who worked around him knew this better than anyone. Dominic did not act impulsively, and he certainly did not spend millions of dollars on meaningless purchases. Yet tonight, he had done exactly that, which was why the quiet ride leaving the underground auction felt so strange. Arya Bennett sat in the back seat of a sleek black luxury car, her hands resting nervously in her lap as the vehicle moved through the silent streets of Manhattan. The city lights blurred across the tinted windows, creating long streaks of gold and white against the darkness outside. 2 security men sat across from her, both dressed in dark suits, both watching her with the calm alertness of professionals who had handled situations like this many times before. Dominic Varela sat in the seat beside her. He had not spoken a single word since they left the auction. His posture remained relaxed, his expression unreadable as he looked out the window at the passing city skyline. The silence inside the vehicle felt heavier than any threat Arya had imagined earlier that night, because she could not understand what was happening. A man like Dominic Varela had just spent $2 million to buy her, and yet he had not treated her like someone he owned. He had not threatened her. He had not even asked her a single question. Instead, he had simply watched her, carefully, as if studying something that did not make sense to him. Arya felt a quiet tension twisting inside her thoughts. She had spent the past hour preparing herself for the worst possible outcome. Every terrible possibility she had imagined about the auction still echoed in her mind. But Dominic's behavior had disrupted those expectations completely. The car turned onto a wide private road, leading away from the main city traffic. Tall iron gates appeared ahead, illuminated by powerful security lights. As the vehicle approached, the gates opened automatically, revealing a long driveway lined with carefully trimmed hedges and towering trees. Beyond them stood Dominic Varela's private estate. The mansion was enormous. It rose several stories above the surrounding gardens, its elegant stone architecture blending modern luxury with old-world design. Large glass windows reflected the glow of the surrounding city lights, while discreet security cameras monitored every angle of the property. The car slowed as it approached the entrance. Arya stared at the estate in silent disbelief. This was not simply the home of a wealthy man. It looked like the headquarters of someone who expected both admiration and danger. Several security officers stood near the front steps, their posture disciplined as they watched the vehicle arrive. They did not appear surprised to see Dominic return so late, but when they noticed Arya stepping out of the car beside him, their expressions shifted slightly. Curiosity, confusion, because bringing someone from the auction to the mansion was unusual. Dominic walked toward the entrance without hesitation. Arya followed carefully, the security guards opening the doors as he approached. Inside, the mansion felt even larger than it appeared from the outside. A massive marble hall stretched across the ground floor, illuminated by soft chandelier lighting that cast golden reflections across the polished floors. Expensive paintings decorated the walls, and elegant furniture filled the space with quiet luxury. Yet beneath the beauty of the mansion, another detail became immediately clear. Security. Hidden cameras watched every corner. Discreet guards stood near key hallways. Nothing inside this building was left unprotected. Arya stopped near the center of the hall, unsure what she was supposed to do next. Dominic removed his suit jacket and handed it to a staff member waiting near the staircase. "Prepare the guest suite," he said calmly. The staff member nodded. "Yes, sir." Arya blinked in confusion. Guest suite? The words did not match the situation she expected. Dominic turned toward her. "Follow me." The instruction was simple. Arya hesitated only briefly before obeying. They moved through several hallways until they reached a quiet section of the mansion's second floor. Dominic opened the door to a spacious room overlooking the gardens. The suite looked like something from a luxury hotel. Large bed, private sitting area, floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything designed for comfort. Dominic stepped aside slightly. "You'll stay here tonight." Arya stared at him. "You're letting me stay here?" "Yes." Her confusion deepened. "You bought me?" Dominic's expression did not change. "That is correct." "Then why aren't you treating me like... She struggled to finish the sentence. Dominic understood the meaning anyway. "Because that is not why I brought you here." The statement hung quietly between them. Arya studied him carefully. For the first time since leaving the auction, Dominic's attention shifted fully toward her. Not with ownership, with curiosity. "You're wondering why," he said calmly. Arya nodded. Dominic walked slowly across the room, stopping near the window as he looked out at the dark garden below. "I rarely make purchases without understanding their value." The words felt more like a statement than an explanation. Arya frowned slightly. "I'm not valuable." Dominic turned his head slightly. "That remains to be determined." The response unsettled her even more, because it suggested something far deeper was happening. Dominic Varela had not bought her for pleasure or for control. He had bought her because he believed she was important. But important for what? Downstairs, two members of Dominic's staff stood near the security office, reviewing the evening's events. One of them, a man named Victor Calderon, had worked with Dominic for years and understood his habits better than most. He looked at the security footage showing Dominic escorting Arya into the guest suite. "That's unusual," Victor muttered. Another staff member nodded. "He paid $2 million for her." Victor leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. "And he hasn't touched her, not even questioned her." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. "That means he thinks she's connected to something." Upstairs, Arya sat quietly on the edge of bed after Dominic left the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The silence returned. She looked around the luxurious suite, trying to understand how her life had shifted so dramatically in a single night. Hours earlier, she had been standing on an auction stage, convinced her future was about to disappear forever. Now she was inside the private mansion of one of the most powerful men in the country, and he had treated her like a guest instead of property. The contradiction made no sense. Meanwhile, Dominic entered his private office on the lower floor of the mansion. Victor was already waiting for him. "You asked for the file," Victor said, placing a thin folder on the desk. Dominic nodded. "Everything we could find about her." Dominic opened the file slowly. Inside were several documents detailing Arya Bennett's history. Birth records, foster care files, employment history. Nothing unusual at first glance. But as Dominic turned to the final page, something caught his attention. His eyes stopped moving. Victor noticed a change immediately. "What is it?" Dominic said nothing. He simply stared at the document in front of him, because the name listed in Arya Bennett's family history was one he recognized instantly, and it connected her to a past he had spent years trying to bury. Some secrets remain buried for years, not because they are forgotten, but because the truth behind them is too dangerous to uncover. For Dominic Varela, the file sitting on his desk was reopening a chapter of his life he had spent more than a decade trying to erase. The office inside the mansion was quiet except for the faint hum of the city beyond the tall windows. Dominic sat behind a large wooden desk. The folder containing Aria Bennett's background spread open before him. Victor Calderon stood nearby, watching carefully. Dominic's expression rarely revealed much emotion, but Victor had worked beside him long enough to recognize the subtle signs of something unusual. And right now, Dominic was staring at a single name printed in the document, as if it had suddenly changed the entire meaning of a night. Victor folded his arms slowly. "You found something." Dominic did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the page. Then he spoke quietly. "Her parents." Victor stepped closer. "What about them?" Dominic turned the file slightly so Victor could see the information printed across the document. 2 names were listed under Aria Bennett's birth records: Samuel Bennett and Elena Morales. Victor studied the page briefly, confused. "That doesn't mean anything." Dominic leaned back in his chair. "It means everything." Victor frowned slightly. "You know them?" Dominic's gaze shifted toward the window, where the distant lights of Manhattan stretched across the night skyline. Not Samuel Bennett, but Elena Morales. The name carried weight. Even after all these years, Victor waited patiently. He knew Dominic rarely spoke about his past unless it mattered. And if that name had caught his attention, there was a reason. Dominic finally spoke again. 20 years ago, before the companies and investments, before anyone outside the city even knew my name, I was building something much smaller. Victor nodded slightly. The early days. Yes. Back then, Dominic Varela had been nothing more than a young man with ambition and a talent for understanding how systems worked. He had grown up in neighborhoods where survival often depended on alliances. People trusted only a handful of individuals, and betrayal was common enough to be expected. But Dominic had something most of those men lacked: patience, instead of building his influence through violence. He had spent years studying how money moved through the city: shipping routes, financial institutions, private security networks. He understood something others did not. The real power in any criminal empire was not control over territory. It was control over information. During those early years, Dominic had formed a partnership with a small group of individuals who believed in the same strategy. Among them was a young woman named Elena Morales. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. The same name. Dominic nodded once. Elena Morales was one of the smartest people I had ever worked with. She had not been a criminal in the traditional sense. Elena was an analyst, a researcher, someone who understood financial structures better than most bankers. She helped Dominic build the early systems that allowed his organization to grow without attracting attention. Together, they had uncovered weaknesses inside several powerful corporations and government programs. Weaknesses that allowed them to move money quietly across international borders. For several years, the partnership worked perfectly, until one mistake changed everything. Dominic's expression darkened slightly as the memories surfaced. The group had expanded too quickly. New investors, new allies, and eventually, someone inside their network began sharing information with outside interests. Competitors, law enforcement, private security firms hired by corporations who had noticed irregularities in their financial systems. The betrayal almost destroyed everything. One night, Dominic discovered that several members of his organization had been arrested during a coordinated investigation. The authorities knew too much. Someone had given them detailed records, transaction histories, names, locations. For Dominic, it was clear. Someone inside the group had betrayed them, and the only person who had access to the complete financial archive was Elena Morales. Victor studied Dominic carefully. "You believe she was responsible." Dominic did not answer directly. "I believed she was the only one who could have done it." By the time Dominic realized what was happening, Elena had already disappeared. No explanation, no warning. One day she was working beside him. The next day she was gone. The betrayal forced Dominic to rebuild everything from the beginning. He spent years repairing the damage caused by the investigation and eliminating anyone connected to the leak. Eventually, his organization became far stronger than it had been before. But one mystery remained unsolved. Why had Elena Morales betrayed him? Dominic returned his attention to the file on his desk. Victor looked at the page again. You're saying Aria Bennett is her daughter? Dominic shook his head slowly. Not exactly. He turned another page inside the file. Elena Morales had married Samuel Bennett several years after disappearing from Dominic's world. Aria was born shortly after. But according to the records, Elena had died in a car accident when Aria was only 8 years old. Victor looked up. So the woman you trusted vanished, started a new life, and her daughter ended up being sold at an underground auction 20 years later. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly. That is too convenient to be coincidence. Upstairs, Aria Bennett sat by the window of the guest suite, staring out at the gardens beneath the soft moonlight. Her mind refused to settle. Everything about the night felt surreal. The auction, Dominic Varela, the strange way he had treated her since bringing her to the mansion. Nothing made sense. But something deep inside her instincts told her that whatever Dominic had discovered inside, that file was about to change her life forever. She had spent her entire life believing her past was simple. A childhood accident, a mother who had died too early, years of moving through the foster system before finally gaining independence. But Dominic Varela had looked at her as if he recognized something, and that thought refused to leave her mind. Downstairs, Dominic closed the folder slowly. Victor remained silent, waiting. Finally, Dominic spoke. If Aria Bennett is connected to Elena Morales, Victor finished the thought quietly. Then she may know something. Dominic nodded once. Elena disappeared with information that could have destroyed several powerful people. And if those people believe her daughter inherited that information, Victor's expression hardened. They would be looking for Aria. Dominic stood from his chair and walked toward the large digital screen mounted on the wall of his office. Several encrypted communication channels were displayed across the monitor. He typed a quick command. Within seconds, a list of intercepted messages appeared. Victor stepped closer. What are we looking for? Dominic pointed to one line of text that had arrived less than an hour earlier, a private intelligence report from one of his security contacts. Victor read it carefully. Then his expression changed. Someone is already asking questions about her. Dominic's voice lowered slightly. Not just someone. He pointed to the sender's identification code. Victor recognized it instantly. One of the most powerful criminal organizations operating on the East Coast. Men who rarely moved unless something extremely valuable was involved. Victor looked up slowly. They know about her. Dominic's eyes hardened. Yes. And that meant the quiet life Aria Bennett had known until tonight was already over. Because powerful people had begun searching for her. And they were coming. Sometimes protection feels dangerously similar to imprisonment. Aria Bennett realized that truth the morning after the auction. Sunlight filtered softly through the tall windows of the guest suite, illuminating the luxurious room in warm golden light. Outside, the garden surrounding Dominic Varela's estate stretched across acres of carefully maintained land, guarded by tall iron gates and discreet surveillance cameras. The beauty of the property almost felt unreal. Yet the quiet tension inside Aria's chest reminded her that she was not here by choice. The events of the previous night replayed endlessly in her mind. The underground auction, the wealthy bidders examining her like merchandise, and the moment Dominic Varela had spent $2 million to take her away. Even now, she could not understand why. She had expected cruelty from a man with his reputation. Instead, she had been given a comfortable room and complete silence. That silence ended when a soft knock sounded on the door. Aria turned cautiously. The door opened and Dominic stepped inside. He looked exactly as he had the night before, calm, composed, and impossible to read. His presence carried the same quiet authority that had silenced an entire room of billionaires only hours earlier. But this time, his expression seemed more focused, more serious. Aria stood slowly from the chair near the window. You finally decided to talk to me. Dominic closed the door behind him. Yes. He moved toward the center of the room, his eyes studying her carefully. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke. You are in danger. The words came without warning. Aria blinked. I was in danger the moment I was kidnapped. Dominic shook his head slightly. That was only the beginning. The calm certainty in his voice made her uneasy. "What are you talking about?" Dominic walked toward the window, looking briefly across the state grounds before turning back to face her. "Your mother was not who you believed she was." Arya felt a small chill run through her chest. "My mother died when I was 8. Yes." Dominic's tone remained steady. "But before that, she worked with people who understood how powerful institutions hide their secrets." Arya frowned slightly. "You're saying my mother was a criminal?" "No, she was something more dangerous." Dominic crossed the room slowly. "Your mother discovered information that certain powerful people did not want exposed." The words settled heavily in the air. Arya tried to process them. "My mother worked 2 jobs and struggled to pay rent. That is the life she built after she disappeared." Dominic's eyes held hers steadily. "Before that, Elena Morales helped design financial systems that allowed some of the most powerful individuals in the country to hide enormous amounts of legal money." Arya stared at him. "That's impossible." Dominic did not argue. "It is documented." He paused slightly. "And when she discovered the scale of what those people were doing, she began collecting evidence." The quiet room suddenly felt colder. "What happened to that evidence?" "That is exactly the question my enemies are asking." Arya's heart began to beat faster. "You think I know where it is?" "I don't know what you know." Dominic's voice lowered slightly. "But others believe you might." Arya stepped back slightly. "I was a child." "Yes, but secrets have a way of surviving through families." The implications of his words settled slowly into her mind. If powerful people believed she possessed something connected to her mother's past, then her life had become valuable in ways she never imagined. Dangerously valuable. Arya folded her arms. "And where do you fit into all of this?" Dominic studied her expression carefully. "Your mother once saved my life." The statement caught her off guard. "How?" "By warning me before the people she was investigating decided to remove everyone involved." The memory clearly carried weight. Dominic rarely spoke about the past, but this was different. "She disappeared shortly after," he continued, "and the evidence she collected vanished with her." Arya tried to steady her thoughts. "So you bought me because you think I know something?" "No." Dominic shook his head again. "I bought you because my enemies were already searching for you." The realization struck her instantly. "You're protecting me." "For now." The answer was calm, but it carried a deeper meaning. Arya walked toward the center of the room, frustration rising in her chest. "You're not protecting me. You're keeping me here." Dominic did not deny it. "Yes." Her eyes narrowed. "That sounded a lot like a prison." Dominic considered the statement. "Only if you ignore the alternative." "What alternative?" Dominic walked to the door and opened it slightly. Outside, 2 security guards stood quietly in the hallway. Beyond them, the mansion stretched into a complex network of monitored corridors and locked entrances. "Outside these walls," Dominic said, "my enemies would find you within hours." Arya felt the truth behind the words. This estate was not just a mansion. It was a fortress. Armed security. Private surveillance. A controlled environment designed to protect the man who owned it. And now it was protecting her, whether she wanted it or not. She exhaled slowly. "So I'm trapped here. For the moment." Dominic stepped back into the room. "But you are alive." The blunt honesty in his voice left no room for argument. Arya sat down slowly, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. Her life had been simple only days ago. Work, rent, bills. Now she was standing inside the mansion of a mafia boss who claimed powerful enemies were searching for her. And the worst part was that she could not be certain he was wrong. Downstairs, several members of Dominic's organization gathered in the security office. Victor Calderon stood at the center of the room, studying multiple surveillance screens displaying live feeds from around the estate. Several analysts worked quietly behind him, monitoring communication channels and digital intelligence reports. One of the analysts turned suddenly. "Victor." Victor looked up. "What is it?" The analyst pointed toward the screen. "We intercepted a new message." Victor leaned closer. The encrypted communication had originated from a network they had been monitoring since the night of the auction. One connected to the same organization Dominic had warned about earlier. Victor read the message slowly. Then his expression hardened. Upstairs. Arya looked toward Dominic again. Why help me at all? Dominic answered simply, because your mother once trusted me. Arya studied him carefully. And you trust me? Dominic's expression remained neutral. That has yet to be determined. The tension between them lingered. Arya could not decide whether the man standing in front of her was protector or something far more complicated. Perhaps both. Just as she opened her mouth to ask another question, Dominic's phone vibrated quietly in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Victor's name appeared. Dominic answered immediately. Yes. Victor's voice came through the speaker with controlled urgency. They found her. Dominic's expression darkened slightly. How close? Victor paused. Closer than we expected. Dominic ended the call without another word. Arya watched him carefully. What happened? Dominic looked at her, and the seriousness in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. The people hunting her had finally discovered where she was. Power rarely looks dangerous from the outside. It appears polished, organized, even impressive. But Arya Bennett was beginning to understand something unsettling about the world she had been pulled into. The closer she looked at Dominic Varella's empire, the darker it became. Days passed after the warning that Dominic's enemies had discovered her location. Security around the mansion increased immediately. Additional guards patrolled the perimeter. Surveillance systems were upgraded, and every visitor entering the state was screened through multiple layers of security. The mansion transformed from a luxurious residence into something closer to a command center. For Arya, that transformation revealed the first real glimpse of Dominic Varella's world. She had initially believed his influence came from fear and reputation alone, but as she spent more time inside the estate, she realized his power ran far deeper than intimidation. It was built on structure, strategy, and a network that extended far beyond the walls of the mansion, from the upper floors of the house. Arya often observed the constant movement of vehicles arriving at the estate. Black luxury sedans pulled through the gates almost every day, carrying visitors who looked like the kind of people usually seen inside government buildings or international financial conferences. Executives, investors, security contractors. Some of them spoke English with accents from Europe or Asia. Others carried briefcases filled with documents and digital tablets containing encrypted information. None of them behaved like criminals. Yet the conversations they held with Dominic revealed a different reality. One afternoon, Arya passed through the large hallway leading toward the conference room and noticed the door slightly open. Inside, Dominic sat ahead of a long table surrounded by several men in expensive suits. Maps and financial reports were projected onto a digital screen behind them. A shipping route across the Atlantic Ocean appeared highlighted in red. One of the men explained something about cargo transfers and offshore accounts while Dominic listened silently. When the man finished speaking, Dominic leaned forward slightly and pointed to a location on the map. The room became quiet. Even from the hallway, Arya could sense the shift in authority. Dominic did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The calm precision in his instructions made it clear that every person in the room understood who controlled the operation. The meeting ended only a few minutes later. The visitors left with brief nods of respect before disappearing through the mansion's security corridors. Arya stepped away from the hallway before Dominic could notice her watching. The scene left an impression that lingered in her mind long after, because she had just witnessed something important. Dominic Varela did not simply lead a criminal organization. He commanded something much larger, an empire, and every person working within that empire treated his decisions as absolute. Over the following weeks, Arya slowly became more familiar with the structure of Dominic's operations, not because Dominic explained it directly, but because living inside the mansion made it impossible not to see how everything worked. Large shipments arrived at private docks connected to the estate's offshore companies. Encrypted phone calls were routed through secure communication rooms. Financial analysts inside the mansion monitored international markets with the same intensity as a Wall Street trading floor, and Dominic oversaw every piece of it. His leadership style revealed itself in subtle ways. He listened more than he spoke. He allowed his advisors to present their ideas fully before responding. But when he made a decision, there was no hesitation, no second-guessing. Arya noticed something else as well. Dominic rarely displayed anger. Even when problems appeared in the reports his staff delivered, he remained calm, which somehow made his authority even more intimidating. Because when Dominic Varela did decide someone had made a serious mistake, the consequences were quiet but final. Arya witnessed one such moment during a meeting involving one of Dominic's financial managers. The man had apparently mishandled a transaction involving one of the organization's overseas accounts. At first, the discussion remained calm. Dominic asked a few questions. The manager attempted to explain, but the more details emerged, the clearer it became that the mistake had exposed one of Dominic's operations to outside scrutiny. Dominic listened without interruption. Then he simply closed the file in front of him. The room fell silent. The manager realized immediately what the gesture meant. 2 security guards appeared within seconds and escorted the man out of the room. He never returned to the mansion. The message was clear. In Dominic Varela's world, competence was not optional. It was survival. Watching these events unfold forced Arya to confront a difficult truth. The man who had bought her at the auction was not simply protecting her. He was one of the most powerful figures operating in a hidden world of influence and danger. And now she was living inside that world. Over time, Arya noticed something else changing. Her own behavior. At first, she had moved through the mansion cautiously, avoiding conversations and staying inside the guest suite whenever possible. But gradually, curiosity replaced fear. She began observing how Dominic handled negotiations, how he balanced relationships with allies who were just as powerful as he was, how he anticipated threats long before they reached his door. The more she watched, the more she understood something surprising. Dominic did not control his empire through violence alone. He controlled it through knowledge, information, strategy, and the ability to see connections that others overlooked. One evening, as Arya stood near the balcony overlooking the main hall, she found herself watching Dominic speak with Victor Calderon near the security office. They appeared to be reviewing a series of digital reports. Victor pointed toward the screen, clearly explaining something important. Dominic listened for a moment before nodding. Then he turned slightly toward the hallway, and for a brief second, his eyes met Arya's. The look he gave her was not hostile, but it was aware, as if he knew she had been studying him just as carefully as he had once studied her. Arya stepped away from the balcony quickly. The moment left her unsettled, because she realized something she had not expected. Living inside Dominic's empire had begun to change the way she saw the world. She now understood how power moved behind closed doors, how decisions made in quiet rooms could influence entire cities, and how dangerous knowledge could become. Late that night, unable to sleep, Arya wandered through one of the quieter sections of the mansion. The hallway lights were dim, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Most of the staff had already retired for the night. She walked slowly, her thoughts heavy with everything she had learned over the past few weeks. Eventually, she reached a door she had never noticed before. It stood slightly open. Curiosity pulled her closer. Inside the room, a large digital wall displayed dozens of photographs connected by lines of information, names, locations, dates. It looked like a map of relationships stretching across powerful institutions. Arya stepped inside cautiously, and then she saw something that made her heart stop. Among the photographs on the screen was a familiar face, her own. Beneath it were documents connected to the investigation Dominic had been conducting about her mother. But that was not what shocked her most. At the center of the entire network displayed on the wall was another photograph, a woman who looked almost identical to Arya, Elena Morales. And beside the image, a note written in Dominic's own handwriting revealed a single sentence: evidence location unknown. Arya stared at the screen, realizing something terrifying. Dominic Varela had been searching for something her mother left behind, and that secret was powerful enough to place her at the center of his entire empire. Just as she stepped back on the screen, the door behind her opened quietly. Dominic Varela stood in the doorway, and he had just discovered that Arya Bennett had uncovered the one secret he never intended her to see. In Dominic Varela's world, loyalty was never assumed. It was tested, and the tests were never simple. Aria Bennett felt the weight of that truth the moment she turned and saw Dominic standing in the doorway of the private operations room. For a brief second, neither of them moved. The digital wall behind her still displayed the web of information connecting her mother's past to a network of powerful individuals scattered across multiple countries. At the center of it all was Elena Morales, the woman Aria had spent most of her life believing she barely understood. And now Dominic knew she had seen everything. The silence inside the room stretched long enough for Aria to hear her own heartbeat. Dominic stepped inside slowly. His expression revealed very little, but the calm intensity in his eyes made it clear that this moment mattered. Aria turned to face him fully. "I wasn't trying to spy on you." Dominic closed the door behind him. "I know." His voice was calm, almost thoughtful. "You were curious." Aria hesitated. "Yes." Dominic glanced briefly at the digital wall before looking back at her. "That curiosity could get you killed." The statement was delivered without emotion, but the seriousness behind it was impossible to ignore. Aria crossed her arms slowly. "You were the one investigating my life." Dominic nodded slightly. "That is true. And you never thought I would eventually discover why." Dominic walked closer to the screen, examining the information displayed across it as if the moment was not as dramatic as it felt. "In my experience," he said quietly, "most people prefer not to look too closely at dangerous truths." Aria looked at the image of her mother again. "You've been searching for something she left behind." Dominic did not deny it. "Yes." "And you think I know where it is?" "No." His answer came immediately. "I believe you might be the only person capable of helping me find it." The difference in wording did not escape Aria. "You're asking for my help." Dominic turned to face her. "I am offering you a choice." The room grew quiet again. Aria felt the tension inside her chest tighten. For weeks she had been living inside Dominic Varela's empire, watching how power moved around him and how carefully he controlled every decision within it. But now the focus had shifted entirely onto her. "What kind of choice?" she asked. Dominic folded his arms slowly. "My enemies are searching for the same thing I am. The evidence your mother collected." Aria nodded. "And if they find it first, they will destroy it." His voice remained calm, along with anyone connected to it. Aria already understood the implication. That included her. Dominic continued. "They believe the evidence exposes several powerful financial networks involved in international corruption, networks that have operated without consequences for decades." Aria looked at him carefully. "And you want that evidence?" "Yes." "Why?" Dominic paused for a moment, not because he lacked an answer, but because the answer carried more weight than most people would expect. "Because those networks were responsible for what happened to your mother." The words settled heavily between them. Aria felt the truth behind them immediately. Her mother had not simply disappeared into a quiet life by coincidence. She had been running from something, or someone. Dominic stepped closer to the screen and tapped a section of the digital map. A group of names appeared: corporate leaders, political figures, and international investors. These individuals built systems designed to move billions of dollars without oversight. Aria studied the information, and my mother found proof. "Yes." And then she vanished. Dominic nodded once. "The night before she disappeared, she warned me that the people behind those operations had discovered what she knew." Aria felt a cold realization form in her mind. "So she hid the evidence." "That is my belief." Dominic looked back at her. "And I believe she left clues that only someone connected to her would recognize." Aria understood what he was saying. "You think she left those clues for me?" "Yes." The room grew silent again. Aria walked slowly across the room, staring at the image of her mother displayed on the screen. For years she had lived with questions that had never been answered. Why her mother always seemed cautious about strangers. Why they moved between apartments so often. Why certain conversations ended the moment Aria entered the room. Now those memories felt different, like fragment of a puzzle she had never known existed. Dominic watched her carefully. He had seen many people confronted with difficult choices before. Most reacted with fear. Some reacted with anger. But Aria Bennett remained quiet, thinking. Finally, she turned toward him. "And what exactly are you asking me to do?" Dominic moved toward the desk at the center of the room and activated another display. A series of locations appeared across the map of the United States. These places are connected to your mother's final movements before she disappeared. Arya studied the map. You want me to go there? Yes. Why not send your own people? Dominic's answer came, without hesitation, because they would not know what they're looking for. Arya exhaled slowly. And you think I will? I believe you might. The difference between belief and certainty hung quietly between them. Arya understood that Dominic was testing her, not just her knowledge, her character, her loyalty. If she refused, he might still protect her, but he would never trust her. And without his protection, the people hunting for her would eventually succeed. She looked at him carefully. Is this about trust? Dominic considered the question. In my world, trust is proven through actions. Arya nodded slightly. And if I help you find the evidence? Then you will have something far more valuable than protection. Arya waited. Leverage. The word carried power. Dominic stepped closer. Enough leverage to ensure the people responsible for your mother's disappearance can never threaten you again. Arya looked down at the map once more. Her life had changed so dramatically over the past few weeks that the idea of returning to her old world almost felt impossible now. She had seen too much, learned too much, and the truth about her mother's past had awakened something inside her she could not ignore. Justice, or at least answers. She finally looked back at Dominic. If I do this, I'm not doing it for your empire. Dominic nodded. I expected that. I'm doing it because my mother deserves the truth. Dominic studied her expression carefully. Then he gave a small nod of approval. That may be the same reason I am. Arya felt the tension in the room ease slightly. But one question still lingered in her mind. You said earlier that you offer me a choice. Yes. She stepped closer. But something still doesn't make sense. Dominic raised an eyebrow slightly. What? Arya met his gaze. You could have found me without buying me at that auction. Dominic remained silent. You could have contacted me, explained everything. He said nothing. Arya's voice lowered slightly. So, why did you really do it? The room grew quiet again. For the first time since entering the operations room, Dominic's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough to reveal that her question had touched something deeper. He walked slowly toward the window overlooking the dark estate grounds. And when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet honesty Arya had not heard before. Because the auction was the only way to reach you before my enemies did. Arya felt the meaning behind the words. But Dominic was not finished. He turned back toward her. And because there was another reason I needed you here. Arya waited. Dominic's eyes held hers steadily. The truth is... His voice lowered slightly. I didn't buy you just to protect you. And the real reason behind his decision was about to change everything. Powerful men rarely admit when something changes them. For years, Dominic Varela had built his empire on control. Every decision he made, every alliance he formed, and every enemy he eliminated followed a carefully calculated plan. His world functioned like a machine, precise, efficient, and built to protect the power he had spent decades creating. But Arya Bennett had entered that machine in a way no one expected. And now Dominic himself was beginning to understand that the night he bought her at the auction had altered far more than he had planned. The operations room inside the mansion was quiet as the final pieces of the investigation came together. Months had passed since the night Arya discovered the network connected to her mother's past. During that time, she had traveled with Dominic's security teams across multiple cities, following the trail of clues Elena Morales had left behind years earlier. Each location revealed another fragment of the truth. Hidden bank accounts, encrypted files buried inside abandoned financial servers, documents that connected powerful political figures and corporate executives to an international system designed to hide billions of dollars through illegal transfers. It was the same network Elena Morales had once helped build, and the same network she had tried to expose before she disappeared. Arya stood near the large digital screen, where the final collection of evidence was now displayed. Every document had been verified, every connection mapped. The truth was no longer a mystery. It was a weapon, Dominic stood across the room, studying the information with the quiet focus that had made him one of the most feared strategists in the criminal world. Victor Calderon stood beside him. "This is enough," Victor said quietly. Dominic nodded once. "Yes." For years, the people responsible for Elena Morales' disappearance had operated without fear. Their power extended across financial institutions, government agencies, and private security organizations. But now the evidence connecting them all was undeniable. Victor looked toward Arya. Once this information is released, their entire network collapses. Arya understood the weight of those words. The truth her mother had tried to reveal was finally complete. But victory carried its own consequences, because the people behind that network were not the kind who surrendered quietly. Dominic walked toward the screen slowly. "Our enemies already know we are close." Victor nodded. They've been moving their resources for weeks. The final confrontation was inevitable. Arya turned away from the screen and looked at Dominic. "You knew this would happen." "Yes." "Then why bring me into it?" Dominic paused before answering, because the truth behind that question had always been complicated. From the moment he saw Arya Bennett standing on the stage at the underground auction, something had felt different. At first, it was simple curiosity. Her resemblance to Elena Morales. The possibility that she might unknowingly hold the key to finding the evidence that had vanished 20 years earlier. But as the investigation progressed, Dominic had begun to see something else. Arya did not behave like someone caught in a world she did not understand. She learned quickly, she observed carefully, and when faced with choices that could have saved her by walking away, she chose to keep going. That was not something Dominic had expected. "You reminded me of your mother," he said quietly. Arya studied him. "In what way?" "Determination." Dominic walked closer. "Elena Morales was the only person who ever challenged my decisions without fear." Arya felt the meaning behind the words. "And you believed I might do the same?" "Yes." For the first time since they had met, Dominic's voice carried something deeper than calculation. Respect. Arya nodded slowly. "Then maybe you should have realized something earlier." Dominic raised an eyebrow slightly. "What?" "I was never going to become part of your empire." The statement hung quietly between them. Victor watched the exchange carefully, but said nothing. Dominic studied Arya's expression. "You're leaving?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Arya walked toward the large window overlooking the estate grounds. For months, this mansion had been her home. A place that once felt like a prison, then a battlefield, and finally something far more complicated. She had learned things here that most people would never see in their entire lives. How power moved behind closed doors. How corruption could shape entire financial systems. How one person's decisions could alter the course of countless lives. But she had also learned something else. Power came with a price, and it was a price she refused to pay. "I didn't go through all of this to become another person controlling people from the shadows," she said. Dominic listened quietly. Arya turned to face him again. "My mother tried to stop these people because she believed the truth mattered." Dominic nodded slightly. "And you believe the same?" "Yes." Victor stepped forward. "The evidence will be released through multiple channels tonight." Arya understood what that meant. Within hours, the network responsible for Elena Morales' disappearance would be exposed. Arrests would follow. Investigations. Public scandals that would reshape powerful institutions. Dominic looked toward the screen one final time. For 20 years they believed they had erased the truth. Arya nodded. But they didn't. The silence that followed carried a sense of finality. The story that had begun decades earlier was about to end. Hours later, the mansion's control room monitored dozens of news channels as the first reports began spreading across the country. Financial crimes, political corruption, hidden offshore accounts connected to powerful individuals. The evidence Elena Morales had risked everything to protect was finally reaching the world. Victor turned away from the screens. "It's done." Dominic said nothing. He simply watched the unfolding events with a calm expression he always carried. But this time the victory felt different, because the person responsible for completing the investigation was not one of his trusted advisors. It was a woman he had once purchased at an auction outside the mansion gates, A black car waited near the entrance. Arya stood beside it with a small travel bag resting on the ground. She looked back at the estate one final time. Dominic approached slowly. Neither of them spoke at first. There were no dramatic goodbyes waiting between them. Both understood what this moment represented. The end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "You could stay," Dominic said quietly. Arya shook her head. "No, you would have influence here. I already know what influence costs." Dominic studied her carefully. Then he nodded once, respecting the decision. Arya picked up her bag and opened the car door. Before stepping inside, she paused for a moment. "You never told me the real reason you bought me." Dominic looked at the distant city skyline beyond the estate. "The truth?" Arya waited. "At first, I believed you were the key to finding the evidence your mother hid." Arya nodded. "And now?" Dominic's expression softened slightly. "Now I know something else." "What?" He met her gaze. "You were the reason it was worth finding." Arya said nothing. She simply entered the car. The vehicle pulled away slowly from the mansion gates, disappearing down the long private road. As the estate faded into the distance, Arya Bennett allowed herself to reflect on everything that had happened since the night she was taken to that underground auction. At the time, she believed her life had ended, but now she understood something far more complicated. That night had not been the end of her story. It had been the beginning. And as the city lights of Manhattan appeared ahead, Arya realized one final truth. The Mafia boss who bought her at an auction had never planned to lose control, but she had changed his plans anyway.